We're back at the Perkins workshop this morning, and we're organizing some material, some 5-quarter decking, pressure treated to build a railing. And a really important thing about that is choosing the correct boards based on the grain and other characteristics that those boards have. So if you want to become a better builder, we got some great info, pro tips for you to make that happen for you.
Boards are made from trees. Trees are a naturally growing material, and therefore each board could be a little different in the way that it's sawn out of the tree. It could have come from the outer part of the tree, the inner part, and could be oriented differently in the way that it came out of that part of the tree. Think about this. Let's just say you're a chef and you got some meat, because I'm gonna make some really nice steaks. The butcher already knows you need a steak. That's a certain cut of meat. You wouldn't take like a roast and like cut that up into steaks, would you? I don't know anything about cooking.
I see where you're going.
You see where I'm going. If you're a chef, you're gonna select the right kind of cut of meat for whatever it is you want to cook, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the same thing, okay?
Except for
with boards. We're gonna speak in sort of a general sense here and say that there are 3 cuts of boards. There's rift sawn, flat sawn, and quarter sawn. Let's start with the rift sawn. This is a board where the grain rings are running at an angle approximately 45 degrees to the flat surface of the board. This is a great example here, and it actually swerves off, and you know, a rift sawn board mostly will have some grain leaning toward cornered and leaning toward flat sawn. This, in my mind, is basically the mid-grade board. The grain direction means that it won't cup as much as a flat sawn board, but it also won't be quite as stable as a quarter sawn board. So it's right in the middle of the road, but a great board. Up next, we have the flat sawn board. Now, this is the most common type of grain orientation because it yields the most quantity of wood out of a tree. Who doesn't want that? But it also will cup the most out of these 3 grain types. All right, so flat sawn boards, why do we use flat sawn boards? If you're gonna use a floor joist and you turn the board on edge, then it's actually gonna have really good strength because the grain lines are running like this vertically in the section of the wood that it's acting like a beam, okay?
So they could be stronger on edge than
maybe, you know,
sawn.
that would be interesting to look into. I actually don't know. In the case of framing, you're probably only gonna get flat sawn boards, especially wide boards, really big boards like 2x12s or something, or 1x12s. And then there's quarter sawn boards. Now imagine a quarter sawn board like the filet mignon.
Oh.
Okay? It's French. Okay, so the quarter sawn board is a superior board in all kinds of ways. It has less shrinkage in both directions as it dries. It has less movement even after it's dry when it's installed. And that's why we like them better. They're less likely to cup and do bad things to your house. Here's something you might want to know. When a board is cut out of a tree, it's wet. Unless it was a dead tree.
Okay.
Let's just say it was a living tree and it was wet. And we're gonna call it green. Wet equals green equals not dry, all right? Now, when the board dries, there are harder grain and softer grain pieces in there, and they're curved. And when they dry, they don't dry and stay flat usually. They bow, or we call it cup. Yes, so they cup. And the direction that it cups is predictable. Actually, you can pretty well know it's going to cup a certain direction, and there are all kinds of cool charts online that you can look at that show the different sections of the tree being cut into different kinds of boards, like flat sawn,
there's going to be
quarter
lots
sawn,
of those in this
rift
video.
sawn. Yeah, we'll throw those everywhere, and some of them actually include the shrinkage shape that you can expect from any board cut out of any part of a tree, because it is so known and predictable. So that information can be really helpful when you install material of a certain cut to make it cup a certain way, if it does, to plan ahead, and so that you have the best results. Here's what we don't want on a deck. I don't want deck boards cupping this way because they hold water.
It'll basically make a puddle.
And you will always have water on your deck when it rains. It'll stay there longer. It'll hold water. It'll be damaging your deck more than a board that is, we'll call it crowned if you put the cup upward.
Or the top cap of your railing, same thing.
Even if you install it the way that I'm going to describe to you, it could still get to where it cups the opposite direction that you want because of the sun shining on it. And the sun drying the top surface can overcome its natural tendency to cup a certain way.
But it's still better to put it on the right way. It would be worse.
Yes. And let me just say, little spoiler alert, it's counterintuitive.
Here's a flat sawn board, and which way would this board cup if the sun was not a factor?
All right, it would cup like this.
Okay, and that is counterintuitive. By looking at the grain, you would expect it would cup that way.
That's
but
right.
The way the grain shrinks, it would pull the edges down. So it's kind of an opposite of what you'd think scenario.
In case you're not getting it by now, cupping is a very bad thing, something we want to avoid, something that can ruin otherwise perfectly good material, and it can ruin your life too. If you have to deal with cupped boards every day, building stuff with cupped boards,
Yeah.
terrible. I mean, I can't think of a whole lot of things that are worse. Now, sometimes we have to prioritize the best face of the board over the grain orientation because a board might be completely unusable.
Trashed.
And maybe you don't have enough. And so you just say, well, forget it. I got to screw this board down. Don't have time to fool with it. That's great too. In most cases, your best face of the board is going to be this face that we're telling you to place upward because the other side was the outside of the tree. So if there is a little bit of a bark edge or something like that, or the board just wasn't quite wide enough, but they made it anyway, that defect is going to be on the bottom, which is what you want. So if you notice, looking at hardwood flooring, say next time you go to the store, check out some of the defect edges and see if they are mostly on that outside edge. I think they will be. Also, grain density is a thing, all right? You can tell kind of a more quality board is going to have a tighter ring spacing, growth rings.
And they'll be heavier.
It'll be heavier, be more dense. It'll have more kind of stiffness to it when it dries, all right? We call some boards noodles. Have you ever had a noodle board, a deck board? They pick it up and it's floppy as a wet noodle. And those boards are going to shrink a lot.
Even in length.
Yes. Now, typically boards will not shrink in length, not even a fraction of a percentage in length as it does in width, all right? But some of those noodle boards, they will shrink up to 1/2 of an inch in length.
Yeah.
And you'll be replacing them. So don't even put them down to start with.
Yes.
That's the whole takeaway here. We want to give you some tips that are going to help you to be successful and not have to go revisit a job that you did and pull 10 boards.
And on that idea, buy extra lumber. You can see here, these are all culls for a project we're doing today, which is railings, which is a highly visible kind of thing. You're going to touch it with your hands, so they've all got to be good. And most building material places, they will charge you a little to restock. Some, it's none. So it's usually no skin off your back to go buy some extra boards, pick through them, return what's not good, and let the next guy get those. It's sad for the next guy.
It's an ongoing cycle. Here's a good example of some growth rings that are fairly far apart and really from nearly the center of the tree, judging on how small this was. This was probably a very young tree, and it probably grew really fast, which can be undesirable for quality of wood. Let's compare that to this board, which is rift sawn, which is a 45-degree grain orientation to the face of the board, and you can see how tight and small these growth rings are. To me, this is a better board.
It is a better board.
It's a better cut of meat, folks. And I wish that the whole stack was this nice, but it's not. And it's got a beautiful face grain too. Actually, if you take a look at this right there, it's worth looking at right there, yeah?
It is nice.
We didn't talk about this much, but these are kiln dried boards. They pressure treat them, which actually gets them super wet, and then these are kiln dried again. You can see these white lines here. These are what we call sticker stacker marks, and they put sticker boards, we call them, in between to let the air flow through it when they're being kiln dried. And by stacking them and having a lot of weight on them, it actually makes them stay flatter when they are dried. If they're basically pinned in their flat position and then all the moisture is sucked out of them, they will tend to stay flat more than a board that's just laying out on the ground, drying and cupping.
Almost definitely desirable.
Let's bring this all the way back around and talk about our railing again that we're actually building from this material. And the reason why we're talking about this, we're going to take the quarter or rift sawn material, which is the higher quality stuff. We're going to put it on the flat surfaces for the top caps because there it will perform the best, better than flat sawn. The flat sawn pieces will get ripped in half and put into a vertical orientation where they're going to be sandwiched into a little layer of wood that's going to make up the vertical picketed area. So by using the best material for the best application, you can actually build something better. Or if you think this is just all a bunch of baloney, you can roll the dice and grab any old board that you want, slap it together, and see what happens.
We're gonna wrap it up here, even though there's a whole lot more that could be said about looking at the material you're using, wood, if you're a builder of houses in America, mainly. And we just wanna encourage you to start doing that if you aren't already. Look at the material you're using so that you can get the most out of it and get the best finished product. That would be our pro tip. Thanks for building with us today, and we'll see you on the next one. Jamie's gonna be ticked when he sees his notebook. I was just flipping to all these random pages because it was bleeding through, you know?
Yeah.
So about half of this thing is now full of those drawings.
Great.